everyone. Welcome to a brand new Film Music Media conversation. I'm here sitting with the amazing composer Joel J. Richard. Joel, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Kai. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so to jump in, I just want to start off with this question. I've been asking this to composers recently, and I just love the response it gets. However you take this question, it might sound simple, but I think it has more profound meaning behind it. As a human being, as a storyteller, as a musician, as a composer, as an artist, what does music mean to you?
What does music mean to me is the first question.
That is the first to set the
Wow.
stage.
I don't know my blood type, so if we're gonna get there, I should know it. I don't remember it. What does music mean to me? Well, that's interesting. I would say how I view music is as a kind of it's a time machine and a time capsule. I mean, I don't know if everyone's experience is like this. I'm assuming it is because there's a nostalgic attachment to music for most people. And I think music is the only one of the few things, music and photos and art in general. But for me, music transports you to various times in your life. A song especially in your teenage years while your hormones are raging, you make the most attachments to music during that period of time. And I feel like you hear a song from that you encountered when you were 14, it takes you right back to it. I have the first time I heard Led Zeppelin's Black Dog, I still remember I don't know what age I was exactly, maybe 11. Was heading out to go snowboarding. It was in the back seat of my mom and stepdad's vehicle driving up the mountains, and it came on, and whenever I hear it or even thinking about it, I can see the mountains, I could see where we are. And
Yeah.
I don't know of my own experience, at least, is I can't think of anything else that transports me to other stages of life the way that music does. And I think that's why it helps movies so much as well. The world building aspect of it, it makes Harry Potter seem like he can fly, or ET, and it makes us have a connection still to our past. So for me, that's what music's always been. And other than that, I would say I feel like it's an obsession, a compulsion. I just always gravitated towards it. So I'm sure there's more stock answers I could give you.
Oh no, I don't. It's just it means it's just my soul. No,
yeah, and all that.
and all that. But I'm curious also, take me back to kind of your origin story. You talked about hearing Led Zeppelin for the first time. When in your life did you kind of were aware of film scores and scoring for visual media, and when did it become an interest and to an actual, like, I'm going to make this a career path?
Well, that part of it I'm still trying to figure out. But as far as, the origin story, I think it's just been, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot just about life in general, how every person we meet, every piece of art we consume, every meal we have, all of it, we're just absorbing, and it's shaping our worldview minute by minute. And if I think back, like the musical journey, I hope this makes sense, but I know when I was very young, I thought life was a very much a non-linear path, or rather a linear path, that you start off here and you say, I want to end up at Z. You start at A, you want to end up at Z, and you think it's a straight line, or at least I did to some degree. And then I feel like the older you get and the more life you experience, you realize you're winding around, and you're almost like a pinball in a pinball machine, where you bounce off of one thing that sends you in a completely different direction. And I think that's been my musical journey, as far as at a very young age. I think it's especially attached with the attachment to cinema. My dad, who, I don't want to say it was a bad parenting move, but when I was 5, he let me watch The Shining. And I don't know if you've seen The Shining, but it takes and I also kind of at the time looked a little bit like Danny from The Shining. I had a similar haircut. I had a tricycle, or actually it was a big wheel. And
did you also have an imaginary friend, or not?
Not yet. but that experience, and then he fell asleep during it, so I watched most of the end by myself. And so at an early age I experienced the horror of the combination of music and disturbing images, and
Yeah.
that left an impression. And then a year or two later I watched the first Alien film by myself, which also left an impression. As far as, but I didn't, at that age I didn't really understand. I couldn't separate music from what I was watching. It was
Yeah.
just I was being assaulted by these images and disturbed by them. But at the same time, I grew to love all that music and those films. But yeah, I mean, it kind of music and visuals for me. That was my initial, I guess, introduction where it had an effect on me. And then my grandparents had uh, an upright piano in their basement and a nylon string acoustic guitar. And every time I would go to their house, for some reason, I just wanted to be near the instruments. And nobody really taught me anything then. I just kind of always felt a desire to play them or mess around with them and make sounds and figure stuff out. And it was just, I don't know, it was always an interest.
Yeah.
And then with, again, this pinball effect. I know my sister was a huge Beatles fan and Aerosmith fan, so she was always giving me music to listen to, and anytime I was around her, she had that music playing. And my dad was more of the classic rock guy. And then around the household, I don't know whose they were, but there were these cassette tapes for like Bach and Beethoven and Mozart that I also always found myself just wanting to put on and listen to. And so it was just, again, like, for me, I mean, this is, before the internet is the way it is. And
Right, right.
it was just, you're exposed to whatever happens to be within your grasp,
Exactly.
essentially. And I think in some ways I was fortunate. There was just a lot of just random stuff around. And then hip hop started becoming big as it when I was little. And I very much gravitated towards that because it was just exciting and different. And then as I don't know what I think around 12 I got a guitar. And I did have my sister's clarinet for a period of time and was learning to play that some in like school, like in the elementary school orchestra, which God knows was probably very far from being in tune and just unbearable for parents. But anyway, but eventually shifted over to guitar. And then I would say like in the 90s, the trip hop scene kind of blew up, and I got really into that side of
Yeah.
things. And product. And this kind of leads me to feeling like I could maybe get involved in film scoring. Strangely, because I think most people, like, I did go see. I remember, again, talking about a time capsule or a time machine. I remember my dad taking me to see The Empire Strikes Back and waiting in the long line, and going to see one of the Jawses with him, and Friday the 13th. I think everything he took me to was usually
Yeah.
terrifying, with the exception of Star Wars.
There's a
Um,
pattern. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I was absolutely familiar with John Williams. I didn't know who he was as a small child.
Right.
Um, and the music for me wasn't accessible in that, like, I grew up in upstate New York in a rural environment. And I don't know where I think the nearest orchestra would have been New York City, probably, or maybe up in Albany. So I hadn't had that kind of exposure at a really young age. So it didn't, when I heard these big orchestral scores at the time, I didn't I didn't think that, I didn't know where they came from, or necessarily think, oh, I can learn how to do this and be a part of
Right.
that. So for me, around the time I was playing in like hard rock bands, hardcore bands, just whoever I could meet to play with at a young age. And then in cover bands, and just again, being a pinball, finding who was into music, and then finding a way to play with them and work with
Yeah.
them and learn from them. And then so I had been making a lot of kind of more Portishead and uh, tricky kind of influence, trip hop type stuff, because I think I found a sampler at a pawn shop. And I had a 4-track and some keyboards and a bunch of guitars, and I was making stuff. And then I saw a John Powell score Forces of Nature,
Yeah, I remember
which
that one.
is probably not the normal origin story. It's not. It's
It's
not.
not.
It's not a massive film.
I did the liner
um,
notes with him for the re-release for La La Land Records. So John and I
oh,
did liner.
nice.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so I remember seeing that film and with Sandra Bullock and Ben Affleck, and
yeah,
there was this John's music, John Powell's music for it, was the first that there were moments that felt where I could connect to it and go, ah, there are things that I'm kind of doing in a very rudimentary way with very minimal amount of equipment, and then it made me go like, where did this come from, who made
yeah.
this? And there was a specific sequence, I think there was something with, I haven't seen the movie probably since, but I'll rewatch it now and it'll be horrifying. No, I'm sure John did a great job. But there was, I think, a rainstorm or a rain sequence, and I really remember gravitating towards that scene. And I think we had rented it or something, and I was rewinding that scene over and over again, and it sparked this idea of like, oh, you can make music that's kind of related to some of the stuff I was doing and apply this to picture. Where I think before that, I just assumed, you had to be doing Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever it
Right.
happened to be. And then for the TV scores, I mean, at the time, I think they weren't orchestral as much, but I wasn't. I don't know. I was more focused on film music at that time when I started to become interested in it.
Yeah.
Um, and then I had a college professor who, um, there basically, I took an art class, and there was a student named Jody who was sitting next to me, and I was taking some um, composition classes at the same time, and I was working on my composition homework in the middle of art class because I for some reason decided to multitask, which is a poor choice. But anyway, and then Jody said, "Hey, I'm part of this program with the school where we have to make films, and they had a TV show, and that was like a documentary style TV show, and could you do some music for me?" I made some music for her with what equipment I had, and then that led her to introducing me to this professor, who then said, "Hey, there's a recording studio with a uh, really probably a pretty decent sized live room where you could fit, I would think, about 30 or 40 live players in it."
Oh
Um,
wow.
and it had a 16 track analog reel to reel tape machine, a console, and no one uses it. And it was like, why don't you just figure out how to use all of this? And fortunately, the person who worked on there, named, I don't know Rich's last name, Rich, was kind of a technician and kept the studio up and running. He would come in and give me tips and suggestions, and then I started recording bands I was in, and I just had full reign of the studio. And there's a grand piano, and I was just kind of always learning and experimenting and probably making fairly horrific pieces of music, but it was kind of how I just started spending all my time. And then I got really interested in the production side of things as a byproduct of, I think maybe this is normal. I found that once I started making stuff and I started having access to all this equipment, I couldn't figure out why things I was making didn't sound necessarily like the drum kit from this album or whatever I
Right.
happened to be listening to. And I just didn't know, I didn't know much about compressors, and I knew how to EQ stuff to a degree at that time, but I didn't realize how much goes into making a Beatles record, what depends on the album, but sound the way they do, or all of the tricks that you can do in a studio and techniques. So that then led to me being really interested in the production side of things.
Mm.
And then I ended up going to school for audio engineering and studied just some of that to kind of learn more and learn what all the tools are, and to have a better understanding of how to use them. And then moved to LA, and somehow just knew I wanted to do something in music. And I wasn't 100%, I didn't come into this going like, I'm going to do film music, or I was still also on the fence. Was I going to do music, or was I going to be an audio engineer? I just knew I loved all of it,
Yeah.
and that's what brought me here. So that's kind of the origin of getting to LA. I can continue if you want once I'm here.
Sure. I mean, I'm curious, like, yeah, once you got, I mean, I think a lot of people are interested how someone who arrives here, gets their foot in the door. I'm curious how you ended up working with
Well, this
like
is
John,
kind
John
of,
Powell, you know?
yeah, I can get us there, and I can get us there quickly.
Sure.
So while and part of the other reason of why I wanted to go to the recording school was I had so in New York I knew I wanted to get an internship at a recording studio because I just felt like if I could get in the door there would be so much more to learn. And
Right.
at the time, um in New York City, and I imagine this is still the case, they were saying like we don't want you unless it's for school credit. And I had some
Mm.
interviews, and I remember the first one where I drove to New York City. I can't remember where it was. It might have been Electric Ladyland. I'm not sure now. Parked the car, got to the interview. It was very brief. It was mostly like, give us a resume, shake your hand, we'll call you, and
Yeah.
walked out to find my car was gone.
Oh
And
my
I'm in New
God.
York City, and I don't know how old I am, but I have no money. And I
Yeah.
remember going back. That's I think that's the greatest magic trick in the world, is going back to find your car has is vanished.
Right.
But I came back to find the car was gone, and then had to trek. I walked across the city for 2 hours to wherever they take the cars. Got my car out, and then sat in traffic for 3 hours to get home. And then I remember thinking, not for me. New York City, it's
Yeah.
just it's too dense. Not for me. California, I'd always been drawn to it. And so I do this recording school program. And in the end, they say you need an internship to graduate. And I was trying to figure out where I, I wanted to do that internship. And this is another pinball analogy here, I guess, is that uh, they gave us a bunch of magazines, and one of them I believe was Keyboard Magazine, and there was an article in it from Jeff Rona, who
Yeah.
at the time was working at his studio was out of Hans Zimmer's. He just finished, I think, White Squall, Tony Scott film, and
Ridley Scott.
or
Ridley Scott.
Ridley Scott. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And and so there was an email address, and I emailed Jeff just inquiring about essentially more about what he does. And there was
Yeah.
a give and take. And I expressed after a handful of emails like, hey, by the way, my school requires an internship. Do you offer one? And I didn't know where he was stationed at the time. I just knew he was in LA. And and um and so he said, come on out. And I met
Wow.
with at the time Sunny Parks, who was I believe she was the running the business end of remote control, which at the time was Media Ventures.
Right.
I
Right.
met with Sunny before she left to go over to DreamWorks. She was lovely. I didn't know anybody coming to LA. I just got here somehow and ended up in that building. And
Yeah.
I interviewed with Sunny, and it went much better than the New York City interviews. And she responded to some degree with something like, well, we don't really do interns anymore. We shut down that program because, we don't want to have to pay interns. And I was like, you don't have to pay me. This is school credit. And she was
Yeah.
like, you're in. And so to some degree, I think for better or worse, I feel like I could be thanked or acknowledged for kind of starting up their intern program again,
Right.
because I just remember her. The first thing was like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And then once it was school credit, it was like, you are hired, sort of.
Right.
And then I could tell you. So then I think I went back to I went to get all my stuff and moved to LA officially. Got an apartment. I had $1,500 to my name, and my rent was between 1,000 and 1,100 for the month. And I knew I had enough to get by for a month,
Right.
basically. And the internship, I don't remember the amount of hours, but um, I had to complete however many hours in the over the course of a month to be able to get, to have this count as a credit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I knew I didn't have the funds to to figure out what to do after that. So I basically, I don't remember who I got assigned to. Somebody assigned me, or basically there was someone in charge of telling me where to be and what to do, and it was mostly like clean coffee cups and um I don't know, dust the chairs. That's
Right.
kind of how it started. And I did that for a few days. and then I think the hubris of youth, I had this realization that maybe this isn't a good thing to share, but the realization was that if the person who was in charge of me was gonna let me run out my time only doing that, and I
Yeah.
wasn't going to learn anything, and then I was going to be in trouble. And so I knew they worked kind of a 9 to 5, and I just didn't go home. I basically
Mm.
stayed there and for well, I don't, maybe 16-hour days for the intern. I mean, I did all my intern hours in less than 2 weeks,
Yeah.
really. I mean, I was there just all day long. I didn't have really money for food, so at the time there were, I think there were Noah's bagels that were being delivered that I would just sit in the kitchen and eat those 3 times a day. But in
Right.
the process of being there, um, I got to meet Jeff Rona, spend some time with him and in his room, and learn more about how he works on stuff. He was working at the book on a book at the time about film scoring, so I got to do some early like proofreading of that. I have a little bit of dyslexia, so not the best person to have proofreading your book. So if you ever have a book, keep that in mind, not me. And then Alan Meyerson was mixing. They were tracking and mixing scores in the Studio A and Studio B within Zimmer's main building at the time,
Right.
and I somehow, somewhere through the tour of the place, I was shown that room. So I just, whenever I could, I would sneak off into the room and sit with Alan, and Kevin Globerman was working with him at the time. And when the time was appropriate, I would ask a million questions about whether the consoles they were using at the time. Kevin started having me help a little bit with, I don't know, I'm assuming you still do this, but with the analog gear, after a session's done, they have sheets that look like a picture, like a template of all the knobs, and you have to write down what all the settings were. And I was being included in some of that, and I was also like getting manuals out of the. There was a cabinet that had manuals for all the equipment, and I just,
Yeah.
some of this stuff I had never seen before. So Alan saw me reading manuals left and right for euphonics consoles and was like, well, who's this kid? And so I developed a bit of a rapport with him, and that was great. And then this is where the pinball, I get hit again, and I go a
Yeah.
different direction. I'm sitting down eating my bagel lunch, and Brian Richards, who became a dear friend, was a music editor at um, uh, Remote Controller Media Ventures at the time. And Brian sat down, slid me over a Taco Bell burrito, and was like, or it was either a taco or a burrito. I was like, I bought this for you. And I was like, you don't know me. And then he's like, but I know who you are. He's like, can you put a Pro Tools rig together for me on a dub stage tomorrow at 6 a.m.? And I said, absolutely. I'd never done it before, but absolutely.
Right.
Because I mean, how hard can it be? And so I showed up. Brian showed me his room, and then I learned what a music editor was, and he showed me his rig. I showed up the next morning at 6 a.m., tore it apart, went with the cartage people over to, I think it was the Warner Brothers stage, set up his rig, and then that was the first time I was on a dub stage, and then Brian. And then I went back and I completed, the rest of my internship hours, and and then the final day, um, basically I thought I was in trouble because now what? And then Brian approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to come work for me and learn all about music editing?" And I was like, "Yes, of
Yeah.
course." And he did tell me that he had heard that Alan Meyerson had wanted to hire me as an assistant engineer at the time, or to work with their team. And I never confirmed this with Allison. Brian didn't tell me until months after I was working with him, but he was like, "Yeah, I heard he wanted you, so I hired you before he could." And so I never confirmed it, but anyway, I went and then worked with Brian for a year, and it was I think for me it was really good because it was a boot camp in
Yeah.
temping, seeing what happens at a dub stage, seeing the type of communication between the directors and the music editors, and if a composer happens to come to it. Temping, excuse me, was really an interesting process where I'd never really spent any time where I just had picture and you just keep throwing one thing after another, and to see how how you can change and alter a scene with a piece of music. And I think that was really, really valuable time for me to spend, because it made me aware, I think, without having to write the music at that time, that um, there's no one solution. and and I think I've taken that with me, that even if I write something, that I know that there are other pathways into making this, to this scene working. And
Yeah.
so that helps, if you're on a project and you're getting notes, or if they say, hey, try something different, I at least go into it knowing that, yeah, there are multiple pathways to make this scene or this film, feel however you want it to feel. So I was working with Brian, and we were working 7 days a week. And with Brian, I mean, I was at home for at most 4 hours a day, and film and TV shows, and then I got to know a lot of people in the hallways and passing, as you do
Yeah.
wandering around that place. And I'm trying to think how it happened first. I think I had met maybe Jeff Sinelli first, and somehow I learned that Jeff was exiting his time with John Powell and Gavin Greenaway.
Yeah.
And John had already moved out and was, I think, in Marina Del Rey in a home studio, and Gavin was still there. And so I somehow got an interview with Gavin, and who is one of the most brilliant, amazing, wonderful human beings I've
Yeah, he's
ever encountered on
fantastic.
this planet. Just, I mean, the best. If we could continue for an hour just on Gavin, I would be happy to do so. Love him dearly. So I interviewed with Gavin, and I was I was fairly stressed, because Brian's personality was more this rock and roll wild man kind of vibe,
Yeah.
and whereas Gavin's proper British, and so for me it was like going from one extreme to the other, as far as just the initial experience to go interview, certainly with somebody. But yeah, for whatever reason, Gavin decided that I'd be a good fit. And I believe I went over to John's and had met with him then. And then they had just gotten Pro Tools, and I was the only one who knew how to use it. So that helped.
There
So
you
that
go.
skill
Yeah.
set, John was on Logic. I had Cubase. He told me to throw it out. And Pro Tools, I was the only one who could turn it on and do anything with it at that moment. So
Wow.
it was a good fit. And then I spent something like 4 years working with John, and I bounced back and forth between John and Gavin depending on what they needed. Sometimes they worked on things together.
Right.
Sometimes Gavin was working on songs for films, and I'd go work with him. And sometimes in a given day, I was going back and forth, and that was I think, I don't, it's like the time capsule thing I mentioned earlier. I don't know if it's, I don't, when I listen to John's music and if I see it in a film, I don't think I think it does transport me back a little bit to those days. I
Sure.
can still,
Yeah.
like Evolution, the David Duchovny score he did, oh God, it was quite some time ago now. I remember that was the first time I got to sit in the room with the orchestra playing, and it was done in
Wow.
LA. And I can't remember if it was at Fox. I can't remember where we did it now. But and as far as I remember, I think it was all the strings were a session. I can't remember if brass was separate or not, but that experience just I don't know. I think it's tough to come by those. So
Yeah,
that
for
was
sure.
just, it was also transformative, and it really showed me everything. Basically, it was an eye opener into a world that I didn't know a lot about.
Yeah.
Everything from the technical side to the composition side. John is a wonderful mentor, human being, communicator. He's inspiring to me because of his vast ability. I mean, he can really, he's a chameleon. I feel like he can do any style, and he has so much personality and thought that he puts into the music, and I hope some of it rubbed off on me, and that anyway, that's the essentially origin. And then after that, I broke off on my own and have been trudging forward ever since.
Yeah.
And that experience is everything from sometimes working with other people, doing my own projects, doing film, doing television, and probably some other stuff in between that I can't recall. I think
Yeah.
that's about it. I think that
That's
gets us there.
that gets us there for sure. Well, I do, yeah. So let's I do want to dive into I mean we could I loved you've done television, you've done films, you've done indie films, you've done and of course John Wick, these big studio films. Well, it started off small and it got pretty big towards the end, but I do want to jump to John Wick because I mean I'm just so curious how I mean, we go back to the beginning. I mean, this was a movie that almost didn't get made, directed
Yep.
by Chad and David, who were just former stuntmen, stunt coordinators who just wanted to kind of make a statement about stunt action filmmaking. Not doing quick cuts, letting the stunts speak
Yeah.
for themselves, and it was made for like $20 million or so, 20-30 million. And I'm just curious, how'd you get on this project, and how did you get paired with Tyler, who's awesome, and yeah, take it back to those early days and
First of all,
what.
$20 million indie film is it's quite an indie film.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I wouldn't
so
call it an indie film, but
I know. I technically it was, which is always a funny thing. But when I think back, if anybody I know who makes indie films, I'm like, well, that was an indie film with 20 million. They're shocked. So now Tyler, I had met. I had been so when I was working with Brian Richards, I met Tyler within a month or so of coming to LA because I was doing when I was Brian and I were on a film called Get Carter, a Stallone film.
yeah,
It was a remake, and Tyler was on that, and so I don't know, for some reason we hit it off and became friends. Again, like a month after getting to LA, and I remember also going to recording sessions for Get Carter, which was I don't remember the orchestral sessions. I don't think were here, but there were like the rock band sessions and jazzy
yeah,
stuff was all done here. But anyway, so Tyler and I have had a relationship at this point for a little over half my lifetime, a friendship, and in the past, we've worked on. I mean, he's seen a lot of my work and worked, and we've overlapped here and there on some stuff. But so John Wick 1, the way it came about was kind of a bit backwards, but Chad and Dave had some I don't remember what songs anymore, but there was some they had a few Marilyn Manson tracks that they had
mhm,
temped into the film, and they had contacted, I guess, his camp and maybe his management to see if he writes music for films, and
right,
my understanding is I don't believe he does. I think he's just works with the albums and as
yeah,
a band leader kind of, and so uh, his people said, "Hey, well, we're working with Tyler Bates right now on Manson's. I guess I think it was their first record together. He actually does film, so you should talk to him." And then they talked to Tyler, and he said, "Hey, it's small world. I have this song, Killing Strangers, that Manson and I just did. You should check this out." And they said, "This is great.
yeah,
How do we put this in the movie?" And then Tyler was in the middle of Guardians of the Galaxy, which the first one, and he'd been on it for. I think he was on that film altogether for a really long period of time, and with James Gunn, he likes having music in advance. They film to a lot of stuff just to have to set a tone, an atmosphere on the set, and Tyler just said, he's like, look, this is I can't. This is the focus right now. Guardians
yeah,
is this massive film. I think you'd be a good fit, and I think your sensibility would really fit this John Wick world. And then he connected me with Dave and Chad, and I went to a screening. Um, I don't know, somewhere in Hollywood, just a screening with a handful of people. And at that point, it was a film. I mean, it was nearly complete, and we all got along. I vaguely remember making a reel to send over to them just so they had
yeah,
a sense of whatever I was thinking, or some of my previous work that was maybe sort of in this world. We had a few discussions, and I was kind of off and running. And that
wow,
one, as far as I remember, there were only I think around four cuts, maybe five cuts I received before it was locked picture, or maybe the fifth was locked picture. So I was on it for 7 to 8 weeks. It was a pretty quick, in and out in a way. And there was kind of a brief spotting session, and it was pretty much Dave and Chad saying. I remember Dave specifically said, we want the film to be fun. We
Yeah.
just want it to not take itself too seriously and be fun. And I didn't know where he was coming from at the time. The temp music was the issue, and I didn't know. So I remember watching the film thinking, how is this fun? You know, the guy, it's like he kills all these people. There's a puppy
Right.
that gets, you know, and
Yeah.
I felt almost traumatized upon the screening. And then I went home and they sent a rough cut, and I muted the temp. And when I watched it without temp music, I realized that the temp was just really pretty heavy and ominous and huge, and that it was playing through some of the humor. And then just kind of sat and did a bunch of free writing to it and came up with kind of ideas and concepts and some approaches. And then we had a playback meeting, and they liked it. Yeah, I think they liked everything. And then just kind of, I was pretty much left alone to kind of make a score
Wow.
and get it done. And then also La Castlevania, Dylan was brought on to do the club sequence for John Wick 1, 2, and 4. And then that's how the first one started. And that again, Chad was only around, he wasn't around for all of post-production. He had to go do, they were still doing stunt choreography
Yeah,
because
this
they
was
were trying to
his.
pay, they were trying to pay the bills, you know?
Yeah, this was their
And
first
yeah,
feature. Yeah, first directorial
yeah.
feature.
So it kind of wrapped up the film with Dave. Played most things. Did one session at Jack Johnson's old studio for drums with Gil Sharon, who's phenomenal. And then yeah, kind of, and then finished the film. And
Yeah.
then I don't know, good 9 months or so went by before it came out, and hadn't really expected any of this to happen as far as it to blow up. And then it turned into a huge hit. And then the second one came, and then the third, and then now the fourth. So that's how
Wow.
it started in my introduction to these guys.
That's amazing. So yeah, we're at the fourth one, and I mean the what I love about John Wick is that it pulls from so much inspiration, stuff that I mean I'm sure you grew up with too. I grew up with, like,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean you have this kind of neo Euro noir, but you're also having martial arts and kind of John Woo gun fu, and pulling in all this stuff. And now with the fourth one, I mean, more so. I mean, it has been, but you have more Kurosawa, more Leone, and kind of fully embracing it
yeah,
as
yeah.
like this is your Once Upon a Time in the West to me. Like John Chapter 4, it was
It is.
like
It is. Yeah. And the funny thing is the acoustic guitar stuff was a happy accident. On the first one, I what did I call? I called the cue I called is the story of Wick. It's like Vigo from the first one's telling the
right.
backstory or
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
lore of John, and I didn't know what to do with the scene. And I had these ideas, and I kind of mocked it up. And I had Brian Richards, who came on as a music editor for it, come over to my studio at the time and played this thing to him. And I was like, I've got acoustic guitars. I'm doing this like David Gilmour delayed Pink Floyd thing. I'm like, is this anything?
Yeah.
I couldn't really tell, because it just felt like a very odd combination. And I remember when I recorded the strum of the acoustic guitar when he was like stabbing with a pencil, and I was like, it feels like it's breaking the fourth wall, like it's just so overtly in your face. Is this terrible? And I remember Brian being like, I love this. They're either going to love it or they're going to hate it, and that's the way to score a movie. And if they hate it, well, F them,
Right.
basically. You'll do something else. But he's like,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
great. And the acoustic guitar came out of the Western thing, just came out of I was just picking up instruments I could play, and for whatever reason, I don't know. I just thought it was a cool fit, and Brian was like, "Yeah, it makes him feel like a gunslinger. This is cool."
Yeah.
But we'd never discussed it before, and then no one commented on it. The music got approved, the music got mixed, and it was done. And so I didn't hear anything about like Chad's love of spaghetti westerns until this. I think the second one, he started mentioning like, "Oh, I love that stuff."
Yeah.
And then on John Wick 2, a similar thing happened where Santino, the villain, if you will, in that one, I wrote this mandolin part for him, just noodling around in my kitchen, because I was trying to find. I like organic, especially in scores that are hybrid. I love organic instrumentation mixed
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
and for me, finger picking and acoustic instruments that are the most expressive instruments I can play. And I actually can't play the mandolin, but I can play that on it. So
Yeah.
but then I made that thing, and then Chad perked up, and then I started noticing like, oh, he loves it whenever there's any of this kind of rubato type playing. And then by
Right.
the time we got to John Wick 4, he was like, I want to reference, classic Japanese cinema. I want to, have this film turn into a spaghetti Western by the time we get to the end. And with
Yep.
John Wick 4, this is, I think, Chad going from first time directing to now directing 4 films, or in a way you can almost say 3.5, because the first one was he and Dave, but like, let's say 3.5 to 4 films, his growth as a director, his confidence to communicate ideas, it's just, he's grown exponentially in his communication for things he wants. And in this one, I mean, this is in so many ways Chad's vision for music, whether it's songs, score. He was really hands-on throughout the process, saying, let's try this, let's try that. There's a good 35 minutes of demo experimentation that I had done that in January. Let me think. The first note I wrote for this film was August of 2021. He
Wow.
had he he sent out an email saying they were filming Kane's daughter Mia, that she was going to be playing violin, and they needed like immediately a violin piece for her to play. And
Oh,
so I just
wow.
started coming up with violin pieces that were whatever length he had asked for, and sent a handful off and some sheet music to go with them. And that piece is now well, I don't know, it's not really a spoiler anymore, but the very end of the film, there's
Sure.
Mia playing this violin piece. But then there was a meeting in January just discussing, Chad saying, hey, I want, this is different than the other John Wick films. It's significantly longer. The shots are wider. There's more dialogue. I want it to be more orchestral. He was throwing out references like Holst and Wagner, and at some point he said, we've already done Vivaldi a bit, but like, his grandfather loved Vivaldi, so he was
Yeah.
just like pull from that, but also the John Wick world. And he wanted choir. He was mentioning again, like Kurosawa and Japanese films, and he
Right.
said, it's going to turn into a Western, so I want that. And I remember just jotting it all down, and I somewhere I have the full paragraph of all the things he referenced, and went back to the studio and was just like, how does this come together? And
Seriously. Like, but the
and
thing I just want to point out that I mean, you're about to explain it, I'm sure, but you managed to create this world that still is unique and to John Wick, and I don't think you leaned too hard into the references where it was just like winking too hard, but it still felt natural to what we were seeing on screen. But yeah, sorry,
and
continue.
that was the real challenge, is figuring out the balance. Because I remember
Right.
coming back and I had this list and I printed it out, and it would just be on my desk, and I look at it and go, okay, what, it's like, you gave me all these ingredients, what is
Yeah.
the salad I'm making with this, or the meal? And I just started writing stuff, and I tried initially doing like kind of like the story Wick, the main John Wick theme. What does that sound like if it's just orchestral? And I
Right.
programmed it, and I don't want to say I hated it, but to me it just felt like a cover, like someone doing a cover of a John Wick tune, but
Right.
just with the orchestra, and any of the magic was kind of gone. And it's not complex music, so it just especially the first one harmonically wasn't very complex, and so that didn't quite work. And then I just kept doing things and making these fusion pieces of, there's one I made called a Newick State of Mind, that had that kind of driving bass guitar stuff I had done in the first one, but I did it with like upright bass, and there were brass and strings and all these chord changes, and it was kind of like had this Miles Davis Bitches Brew influence, and it was just
Yeah.
trying things and sending it off, and they would grab little bits they like. And then the Western stuff, again, it was trying to figure out what is the right balance between a sound that we're familiar with and the sound that's the John Wick sound, and then
Exactly.
something new. And it was really kind of like moving the slider around
Yeah.
of to what degree is, because if I lean too much in the spaghetti Western world, it, for me at least, it felt like it was pulling you out of the film. It didn't
Sure.
feel like John Wick. And if you go too orchestral, it also didn't. I don't know why. I can't answer. I think every project you work on, my observation of the years has been that the picture dictates what it wants, to a
Yeah.
degree at least. It just, you throw stuff against it, and this goes back to the music editing stuff. You keep throwing stuff against picture, and a lot of it just slides down the wall. And I think even John, when I worked with Powell, John used to say well, pardon my language, he would say something like, "You just keep throwing shit at the wall and see what sticks," kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's the same thing. There's something about these images and the cinematography that when it's a purely orchestral score, it didn't feel like it was interlocking with it. It just felt like it was
Right.
sitting on top of it. And somehow the sounds from John Wick 1 did fit picture. And they're grittier and dirtier, and there's a raunchy kind of attitude to them that I think juxtapose how beautiful and colorful the actual images are within the film. And so by the time we get to this one, yeah, it's just trial and experimentation. And then Chad, I will say, I've never worked with a director like this before. John Wick for assembly cut shows up. It's 3.5 hours to 3 hours and 45 minutes long,
Yeah, I
roughly.
remember he was
And
saying that that was like 350. Yeah.
I did not know what to make of it. It is the longest thing I've ever worked on. And I the takeaway was that you would need to expand the music vocabulary, just because the film
Right.
was 2 films and it was just demanding more things of a score, of the songs, of all of it. And Chad, there was no spotting session. I mean,
Oh,
my
wow.
past experience was always you sit down and you spot a film. And
Yeah.
Chad, it just isn't really, that's not how it goes. He might play you part of a scene here and there, but it was pretty much, here's the film, go make music, um, make mistakes,
Yeah.
fail, just send stuff. And he was like, I'll weed through it and I'll make it better. You know, it was kind of like, I'll take what I like, discard the
Right.
rest, whatever, just keep making stuff. And it's easy to sit and talk about music. You and I could talk all day about, oh, let's try
Sure.
this. Oh, it'd be great if the score was nothing but oboes. But until you try concepts out, you don't really know if that concept is going to work or not. And I think, he really wanted choir. I knew that much, and that it would work, because I had there's been a through line through all the John Wicks where she's kind of ghostly, but I don't know why I like gravitated towards. There's a subtle female vocal that plays his deceased wife's melody, like throughout the
Yeah.
films. And if you really like look for it, she's calling to him all the time and calling to him to come back to her and
Oh,
or to
wow.
be with her. And so him asking for a choir, it made sense to that you could build out and expand it in a way. Is the choir um his wife being louder and the echoes of her? Is it just all of heaven calling to him?
Right.
I don't know exactly what it represents, but I know he wanted it, and it seemed like it was going to work. And the last thing I'll say is on with Chad, you don't really, since you don't spot a film, you don't really have he's working so much on trying to get the visual
Oh, yeah.
effects and all the stunt work, and then again this film, the scale of it, to get it under control. That music is one of the last thoughts for him, as far as to really be able to talk about it. So really the music process for him, the most engagement you start to get is basically the week before the final mix starts for the film. And so the orchestra was recorded. Let's say that the final mix, the dub, where we mixed sound design, dialogue, and the music, all of that got started. The mix for that started on a Monday. The orchestra was recorded uh, that weekend leading up to it. So
Oh my
Friday,
God.
Saturday, and Sunday. The last session was Sunday. The mix for the film starts on Monday, and the mix was supplied with all the pre-records, all the non-orchestral elements, all the mocked up um,
Wow.
elements. Then live orchestra is being basically flown in as it's ready to go in an Atmos mix. And then once Chad has all of this, the process begins of him going, I don't like that, or I want to change this, or can we add this to that? And then I got a request to make a Western toolkit, which was interesting. Chris, there were 3 phenomenal music editors on the project, and Chris Newland called and said, "Hey, we need more Western stuff. Chad's asking for just more stuff he could sprinkle around. What can you do?" And I said, "Give
Yeah.
me an hour." I made a folder, put up a microphone, and just started recording acoustic guitars, slide guitars, harmonica, ocarina, anything I could grab, and
Wow.
and sent that to him, and tried to say, hey, this is what key this stuff is in,
Yeah.
good luck. um, on top of the I had already done the final stretch of the film where it becomes more of a direct homage to a Western, the
Yeah, I mean,
Western genre.
he's just like taking shots directly from those films, and to
Yeah,
get the
but Chad basically it's just, I get it too. It's like with a film like this, he's like, every change Chad makes informs the next decision. So he
yeah,
changed
yeah,
the cut, he swaps out visual effects, he shortens this scene or lengthens that scene. And it's all happening right up until the last minute of, in John Wick 4, there's the hourglass with the sand running out.
yep.
This is the hourglass for the score, and for the film is Chad in the final minutes of the dub mix. And then so when we get to the Western section, for example, I had originally done this 5.5 minute sweeping piece of music that's on the album called Pistol Procession, and
Yeah.
fragments of that are still used in the film. But 4 days before the mix ended, Chad said, you know what? Now that the sound design's coming in and we have all this stuff, uh, let's try just muting all the music and see how it plays, and then building it back up from there. Because he said, I think he was talking about like Fellini and like David Lynch and the hyping up sound design, and what it would be like if there wasn't music and we're just hearing the wind and the crunching of their feet on the gravel.
Yeah.
And then from there it started, well, let's add a little something here, or let's add a little something there. Let's try something completely different. I mean, the last piece I wrote for this film was, I turned in the morning of the final day of the mix. I did it the night before, when they're all going up the stairs.
Oh, the stair
And
fight. Oh my God.
or no, after the stair fight, once they
Yeah.
finish, and John and some of the other characters are walking up the stairs, and the sunrise is coming up, and there's this kind of rubato Spanish guitar thing,
Yep. Yep.
and the pulsing and strings and all that. I mean, I did that. I started that at, I think, 9 o'clock at night the night before, and came up with that like that, because that's how Chad works. It's just, let's try this now, let's try something else, and you just kind of do that every day until you hopefully land where he wants, the film to be and the score to be. And again, the next day he might swap out a piece and go, oh, now that this is different, I want the next piece to be different. And it's a give and take. So this one was really collaborative, and Chad was, again, really, really vocal and hands-on, and it was a really, really a interesting, good experience.
That's incredible. I mean, I mean, when you say all that, looking at that film, I'm just thinking of like, I mean, the picture changes and conforming and stuff, but it seems like
Oh
it
yeah.
was. I mean, you're dealing with that as well, but it's interesting that like he was taking stuff, and I mean, you definitely relied on music editors and a collaborative effort, and just to make, because those sequences, I mean, I can't even imagine choreographing, not only
Oh
blocking them out,
yes.
then filming it, then editing it. I mean, there's like 20-minute fight sequences that are just like, I'm like, how's he gonna top the last one? Like, holy crap. Yeah, that's how, I mean, that
Yeah.
stair fight was insane. I mean, the club fight with the boss is insane. And I'm just like, I'm watching this stuff. I'm like watching the shots, watching the cuts, and also feeling the music as well. And I'm just, but the way it came together, I don't think you sometimes you can tell when a movie's been trimmed down because you're missing all that. Like, you can feel like it just get, and the flow still worked. And even at 2 hours and 50 minutes, it still was like, I was never bored. I was never like taken out of it, and it kept me engaged the entire time. And the film was fantastic. I mean, I'm
Yeah, and
attributable
I
to
think it's
yeah,
it's a testament to Chad's focus on all this, because honestly, when,
yeah.
when that first assembly cut came in, the Osaka, just the Japanese sequence was 2 entire reels, and it might have been a little longer, and it was something like a 40-minute stretch.
40
And
minutes.
I
Yeah,
I remember watching through the whole thing, going like, how, I couldn't keep it in my head. There was just so, it just felt like I had watched
yeah,
3 movies at that point in a row. And so I just tried to compartmentalize and go, okay, the first problem or thing to solve was, aside from making all those early demos and experiments, it was then, now I had picture, and it was like, well, let me try to figure out, how do I make this Western world work in
right.
the end. And I started from there and kind of just focused on, um, once they get to the top of the stairs, and just went all the way to the end of the film and focused on that. And then I was like, okay, the next problem is, what do I do with the marquee, and what do I do with, just the Osaka kind of language, and
Yeah,
how do you expand that, and how to differentiate. Um, that was the other part of the puzzle, I think, is how to differentiate these worlds while still feeling like they're cohesive, and also not feel like you're just, blatantly trying to rip off other cultures, or to do anything that would be offensive and
Sure. Yeah.
appropriating something, and to demonstrate that you are paying homage, but also again being true to what I think has become the sound of John Wick. I mean, I
Very
feel like the
much. Yeah. Very
franchise
much.
has a sound,
It very
and
much
when
does.
you
Yeah.
stray away from it, it does start to feel again like, I don't know, like it just doesn't fit anymore. So
Yeah.
the next thing was figuring out Osaka and figuring out some of the the low string motifs and things that are in there that are more of a throwback to that Japanese cinema. And then even that, I think I doubled with. There's this one beautiful shot of uh, when John goes up to meet Shimazu for the first time, and he's just standing and the wind's blowing, and it's just
Yeah.
this beautiful like low string cello and basses theme, and that on its own sounded great, but it somehow for a moment didn't quite feel like John Wick. It started to feel like Temp, even once it was
Right.
written. And then I was like, well, if I can bring in some of those John Wick colors, I think I doubled it with some eboed guitar, eboed bass, and some gritty stuff just to mix in there to kind of help again like lock it together with the other John Wick stuff. All of a sudden, it was like it felt like it was its own
Yeah.
and part of the film. And then yeah, so it was just really a process of figuring out those separate worlds and then kind of bouncing around a bit, and then figuring out pacing as the cut evolved and went from the nearly 4 hours to
Yeah.
just under three, because pacing changed significantly,
Oh, I can't imagine.
and then reshoots happen, and then scenes that were truncated have now expanded, and then you have to rethink it all. But yeah, and then the Morocco section was easier because there there was already a language established in the third John Wick since he had gone there. So
Right.
pulling
Right.
some
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
those colors in, but again, adding more of this orchestral element that Chad asked for,
Yeah.
and figuring out how to make that work. And then in the end, the sound design, when we went to the premiere, the sound design is incredible and
It's
massive.
insane.
And
Insane.
so yeah, you're just being assaulted by visuals, by the
The
music, by
gunshots,
the
the
sound design.
punches. I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
there, that the whole sequence too, where thankfully I started playing the game Hong Kong Massacre when he goes overhead and it's on top down view. That's like a direct reference to a video game that like
Oh, I don't
is,
know that.
yeah, it's I'll show you a clip later. I can send it to you. It's literally a top down game, a very low budget game, but it's a direct inspiration of John Woo film. So you're just literally with the
Yeah,
shotgun,
yeah.
with this a flaming shotgun blowing through like things, and I'm like, oh, somebody's a fan of this game, and I was like, it's awesome. It didn't feel like a tacky tack on it. It worked for that sequence, and it was again pulling from the references around. It just felt natural too, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like it just like
Yeah, I do
yeah,
know with that scene when back in maybe it was March or April around of last year, going down to meet with Chad in his offices, he played that scene,
yeah,
and a little bit of the end of the film, and maybe a little bit of Osaka. But I remember when I think what they call it, it's either the top shot or top down scene.
yeah.
That sequence, I noticed I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I was at the edge of my seat just trying to get as close as I could to the TV because I didn't understand what I was seeing at first because the John Wick world never did this before, and all of
Yeah,
a
it's
sudden the camera's
disorienting.
up and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, and I just remember thinking like this movie does so many different things. He could have just done that and people would probably be excited. So
Yeah.
I really do think he just anything and everything he could think of they threw at this film. So I don't know how you top it as
I
far
don't
as with these
I know
set pieces.
there's articles going out right now where the studio wants to keep going and Chad is quoted saying like we had to end this thing and there was fights about the ending and which we won't spoil or anything, but I think
Yeah,
if this is the swan song, that's the what's a hell of a way to go out. If they I mean I know they have the ballerina spin-off and it's a great world. It's a great world to live in, and it's just this amazing lore that you guys created. I mean, just not with the sound, but with the story and then yeah,
and
I
it's an
mean it's
original story. I mean
yeah, it's original.
that in itself is amazing.
Yeah,
I can't think of one in recent years that's gotten this big that didn't come from a pre-existing
wasn't based
book
on
series
a
or
comic book or
comics. Yep.
a novel or anything. It's an original story, and I think
Yeah.
it has evolved so well. And your and Tyler's score has evolved so well over the course of these four films. And before we wrap up, though, I do want to talk about Tyler. So, talk to me about working with him, and how did you guys complement each other, and what did he help with you to get the kind of job done?
Um, well, Tyler's a great resource as just a human being.
Yeah,
Certainly a motivational speaker as far as I'm concerned. So I've I feel blessed that I've been able to have phone conversations that are just lift you up
Yeah.
with whatever you're dealing with in life. For the most part, we work independently. Because I'm in my own separate studio, and I kind of do my thing. There's Tyler's a really phenomenal guitar viol player,
Yeah,
which
he's
is
awesome. Yeah.
a color right off the bat that seemed like something that was a good fit because it blurred the lines between the rock world, the orchestral world, and so if there are cues that come up where I think that will be a good fit, I can throw them his way and say, hey, can you put some guitar viola on it? Or I'll mock some
Yeah.
stuff up with like cello parts and say, can we get something like in this kind of realm? Another thing that's been really useful is I mean, I play all my own guitars, but and John Wick 3, I don't know, I tend to I do a lot of writing and like away from the computer. Just I tend to just think about scenes and see them over and over and think about how the music's going to work, or I'll dream as well. Like after I'll dream about a scene kind of over and
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
and come up with ideas. And I woke up, I think it was either on a walk or I'd woken up one morning with the thought of like a talk box guitar could be a cool color. And just because I couldn't think of any films that had one, and I felt like it's expressive. And we were talking one day, and I had mentioned, I was like, I don't have. I was thinking of ordering one. He's like, oh, I have a talk box. I think he might have already had one, or he was playing with Jerry Cantrell and had one. And he's like, I can, yeah, just let me know where you want talk box. I'll throw that on there. And that color seemed like a really fun new color that got added on
Yeah.
John Wick 3. And then Tyler, as far as the songs have been, yeah, ever since John Wick 1, the most of the songs until this one have been bespoke songs where
Right.
um uh the Manson song Tyler already had. They had already made that song. So that was a song that just happened to get put in John Wick before it actually was released. But then Tyler had been working with an artist named Cassandra Nostalgia. She goes by Nostalgia. They did, it's either one or two, one, I think it was one song on John Wick 1 where he finally kills Vigo's son.
Yeah.
And then on John Wick 2, I think it was Jerry Cantrell did a song with, and another Cassandra song. And then John Wick 3, he had been working with Bush, so they were able to get a song in and work on that together for that. And then on this one, man, he did a really interesting and cool remake of this French version of Paint It Black.
Yes, which was
That
awesome for that
that's
fight
yeah,
scene. Oh my God, that was perfect.
it's great, and it gets
Yeah.
orchestral and it's blown
Oh
out.
yeah.
And then he did a cover of Nowhere to Run with his daughter Lola Collette is now an artist. And
Oh, that's awesome.
so I think they might have recorded that in New York. And then oh, and then in the end he did Rena, who plays Akira in the film. The studio in the end said, hey, why don't we try to do the Bond kind of thing in a way and have a main
Yeah.
title song versus it being scored like it has in the past. And so he and Rena and another songwriter named Brosco came together and did that song, which came together, I think, in the final days of the film as well. So it's just kind of been a really cool experience where, certainly for the first three, where the music's all going to fit together because
Right.
one thing's informing the other. And the fact that, especially when it comes to knowing in advance or hearing rough demos of songs that are getting placed in there that Tyler's working on, and go like, oh, I can make the score work really well in and out of that, and if need be, find certain sounds to blend. And sonically, they just really complement each other. This one was more challenging because more outside music was brought in, so it just was a little more of trying to figure out, which hopefully it all transitions smoothly into, from score pieces
Oh, it
into
does. And I think
songs.
that
But
I love hearing that too, because I'm a good friends with Dom Lewis, who works with David Leitch on and did Bullet Train, and it was kind of
yeah,
a similar
yeah.
situation where Dom produced the songs, did the score, and was able to create that kind of seamless, and did actually like a lot of tracks that were kind of like, hey, I know you like needle drops, let me do something score like that is kind of song like, and create that seamless that seamless experience where it doesn't feel like someone's just starting a song. It's just all woven into the
Yeah.
editing, woven into this to the narrative. And yeah, John Wick 4, man, it's a testament. That's like one of my, I mean, just to see action cinema thriving in 2023 like that, where it's stylized, but it's also, I mean, really engaging emotionally and just like thrilling, and just, I mean, pushing filmmaking to a place that's just awesome. And I just want to thank you so much, Joel, for your
Oh, thank
time,
you.
for discussing it. I mean, honestly, I think we could do like a master class if we did all 4 films of like
it is a lot of footage to cover. Yeah, I mean, maybe
yeah.
we should have done this 2 films ago, versus all in
Right.
one go. No, yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Just I forgot how many. I don't. It's at least what, is it 8 hours? No, probably more, or close to 8 hours or more with the footage. I don't. It's probably a little over actually,
Yeah, over. I
between
mean,
all
yeah,
4 of them.
yeah,
Yeah, it covers a lot of territory. I mean, Chad said he wanted a film that's going to make you cry, it's going to make you laugh, it's going to put you on the edge of your seats, it's going to make you feel like there are horrific moments. It's just everything. He really
yeah,
wanted it to be. This is like his, as you said, this is the swan song and
yeah. This
his
is
like
Once Upon a Time in the
loves
West. Yeah.
love film to cinema and everything that he grew up
Yeah,
loving
it's
and
a love letter to
admiring.
cinema,
So,
but the fact that
yeah.
it's its own unique voice is a testament to it too, because it is a love letter, but it's also like John Wick is John Wick. And we talked about how the sounds needed to feel right, and yeah, it needs to feel right. The cinematography, that kind of hyper neon look that
Oh
just looks
yeah, yeah.
beautiful in Dolby Vision when I finally get it
frame
back at
frame
home.
by frame.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
frame by frame.
yeah,
And that's the other thing I noticed when this film came in. I just kept finding myself, I would stop writing and I would just
yeah,
pause on different shots and go, that is gorgeous. Or the shot in front of the Eiffel
right.
Tower, shot after shot. And in the church, Chad said those were all real candles in the church sequence when he
Wow.
goes in. And I think he said something like $40,000 worth of candles that were just these special candles that are triple wicked, and that
Triple
would
wicked. Perfect.
yeah, but it's beautiful. And he focused so much on having natural light in a lot of the scenes. And
Yeah, stuff that you can really only do with digital photography like that to kind of get that, yeah, which is
there's depth, and it just pulls you in. And yeah, and in a lot of ways too, I think because it's some of the score is pretty minimal under some of the scenes, because he's
yeah,
just like, I want to make room for all the sound design and let you soak in these images. So no, it's a pretty big franchise as far as like how many things it accomplishes within it
for
and
sure.
visually. And so, but I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate you watching them.
Oh yeah, and
So,
yeah, thank you for you taking the time. I know I mean it's a
oh,
lot of work, and I hope we get to do this again sometime. It was so much fun. I know you don't do too many of these, but it was a blast.
I'm trying. I'm trying to get out of my introvert shell
Sure.
of not talking to other humans. But no, it's been a pleasure, Kaya. So I really appreciate it. Well, it's sort of related, but I just want to note regarding Dominic Lewis at the premiere. I was sitting next to Dave, and the first thing, I hadn't seen him in a while. The first thing I was like, I love Bullet Train. Dominic Lewis like killed it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, I just met with him earlier in the day." But no, I thought Dominic did a great
Oh yeah.
job. I thought the film was a ton of fun. I thought it all worked seamlessly, and it was really great. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to see that relationship blossoming, and I'm excited to see what they come up with next.